Welcome to Navigating a Broken Vessel. I'm Dave Harris, and I want to tell you a couple of stories in this episode. The first one was when I was in kindergarten. And when I was in kindergarten, the class decided to make was just a circle of clay, a flat circle of clay, and they were going to impress in that circle of clay a handprint. This was going to be a Mother's Day gift. So the teachers came up with this idea of this flat clay, impress the child's handprint in it, and then fire that clay, put a little hole in it or whatever, tie a little ribbon to it so that it could be hung up on the wall, and the mothers would have this fantastic little memento of their child's handprint, which was pretty cool. Now, when it came time for us to do that as a class, I was absent that day. I must have been sick. I have no idea. It had to have been sickness. That's the only thing I can imagine. There's no reason why I would ditch out on a kindergarten. That would come later in high school. But the key to it was that I was gone that day. The next day, when I had come back, the teachers had a small disc of clay for me because I had missed when the rest of the class did it. And so I remember playing, I was probably playing with some model trains or something, those wooden trains, because I love those things so much when I was in kindergarten, still do today. But I remember getting called, David, could you come here? And it was one of those little short, tiny little tables, right, with the tiny little chairs, because that's what it was in kindergarten. And the teachers were sitting there. There were two of them, and they had that disc of clay. And I knew exactly what was going on. I saw that little disc of clay and I thought, I need to put my hand in this thing. And so I walked right up to it and just kind of like, yep. And I put my hand in it. And they're like, oh, no, not yet. And they took my hand away and they used a little cloth in their hands or whatever to kind of smooth it out. And they said, okay, we're going to take your hand and we're going to put this in the right way. And so they took my right hand and they impressed my handprint in this little disc of clay. That has stuck with me my entire life. Here I am getting close to 50 years old. So this is almost half a century ago, 45 years ago, 44 years ago, whatever you want to call it. But what's funny about it is I remember that overconfidence. I remember what it felt like at 5 or 6 years old, depending on how old I happen to be. I can't remember. But I remember that overconfidence of thinking, well, yeah, I know what to do. I'm going to put my hand in this clay, right? And going and just walking right up and sticking my hand in that clay. I don't know, like looking back, I don't know if like I could have done it right or not, but the teachers clearly wanted to guide how this took place. And so there you go. So in my mind, that is probably my earliest example of what I would call overconfidence. I want to give you another example. This one happened recently, right? So I'm talking about something that happened almost half a century ago. Now I want to talk about something that happened relatively recently. I'm up here where I do my work from. I have my little office here, my little one-room office upstairs in my house. It's the only room that's upstairs. And I wanted to have my desk, my chair, and so forth be a little higher off of the floor. And so I decided to build, in video production, we just call it a riser. Right? It's just a riser. It's essentially just a small piece of set furniture, if you want to call it that, that's maybe 8 to 12 inches tall. It's carpeted, but it's really only, a certain dimension. In other words, it's just meant to get things higher off the ground. I'm actually sitting on this riser right now. I actually decided about 2 months ago that I would build this riser. I bought all the wood, decided it would be 12 inches tall. I had in mind what I was going to do. Now, I'd built the whole thing. It was 8 feet by 8 feet. 8 feet by 8 feet. That's how big this riser is, and it's 12 inches tall. I built it from lumber all the way around the perimeter. It's 2 by 12 lumber that I cut to 8 feet, and then I used 2 by 6 joists. I don't tell you this to tell you about construction or anything. My point is it was heavy, right? And then I had 2 sheets of plywood on top of it. It was heavy. And I also knew that I needed to get carpet on this riser because of sound, right? I want to make sure the sound sounds good when I do my podcasts and my video production, things like that. And so I wanted to make sure that it had carpet on it. So I had the whole thing built. It was 12 inches tall. It was 8 feet by 8 feet, 2 sheets of plywood. I estimate it probably weighs about 300 pounds. That's what I'm thinking about, 300 pounds. which if that's kilos, good gracious, I should do some kilos, right? 2 pounds in a kilo, basically. So it's about 150 kilos, 160 kilos, if that's how you measure things. In short, it was heavy. Now, I'm the kind of person that thinks I can do these things. I can totally pull this stuff off. And so I talked to my wife, Shelly. I said, hey, here's what we're going to do. I want to put carpet on this riser, but in order to do this, I need to spread the carpet out over the riser. I need to lift up one end, and we're going to tuck all of the carpet underneath the riser, and then I'll staple it down or nail it down or whatever. In short, I needed to lift the riser up so that I could push the carpet underneath it. But it's 300 pounds and I am one person. I didn't want to wait. I didn't want to wait for people to help me. I thought, well, I can do this. I can totally pull this off. I can lift it up. I'm not lifting the whole 300 pounds up. I'm only just lifting up one side. And so it should only be about 150 pounds somewhere in that area. And my thoughts were that if I can't lift it, then my muscles will just not lift it. In other words, it would be like, well, I tried to lift it and I couldn't lift it, and I'm going to have to wait for people to help me. I didn't even think at all about the idea of me lifting it and something in my body breaking as a result of that. It didn't even cross my mind. So I told Shelly, I said, all right, let's lift this thing up. I'm going to lift it. You're going to put some things underneath it so that we can kind of prop it up, right? I mean, I'll lift it, I'll hold it up, we'll put some things underneath it, you can help me tuck the carpet in, it'll be perfect. I took both my hands, I had my palms up, and I stuck my hands underneath the riser, the bottom of the riser. I started to lift it, and it was heavy. I'll tell you, it was heavy. And I thought, well, I can still do this. And so I had my palms up in the air, and as I was lifting it up, in my right arm, I literally heard a snapping sound, like a rubber band snapping. I felt pain in my elbow and in my shoulder as well. And I also lost the ability to hold this riser up. All three of those things happened at the same time. Oh, and the fourth thing, it started to hurt really, really bad, right? Maybe I'd mentioned pain. I should probably say the fourth thing was the pain was super, super bad. It was not fun at all. So luckily, when I put the riser down, when I dropped it effectively, Shelly wasn't underneath it, my feet weren't underneath it, things like that. So good there. But I knew exactly what had happened. I knew exactly what had happened. I had pulled or ruptured my biceps tendon on my right elbow. I'd pulled that tendon right out of the bone of my forearm, my radius bone. And I knew that had happened because when I looked at my bicep muscle, all of the muscle was gathered up in one place and the pain was right where it would have connected. Anyway, I knew that this would happen. I've seen it happen to arm wrestlers. I've seen it happen to baseball pitchers. I know that it happens. And so therefore I knew exactly what it was. Now, Shelly, bless her heart, being the best wife ever, was, are you okay? Are you okay? What happened? And I couldn't talk at all. I could not talk at all. I couldn't say barely a single word. It hurt so bad. Uh, Crazy thing is I got this on video because I have security cameras, and I happen to have a security camera in my office that happened to capture this. For those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to play this. If you're listening on a podcast, Spotify or Apple Podcast, whatever it might be, you're probably just going to hear things which may not be very beneficial, probably best for you. Now, I'm going to go ahead and play this video. If you're a little bit squeamish, then definitely this is something you'll want to skip over. It doesn't take long. You'll just see me start to lift it up, and then within a second or two of me starting to lift this thing up, you'll see me drop it, and then you'll see me grabbing my arm in pain. So I'll go ahead and play that now.
Are you okay?
All right. I apologize for that if that really was too much for you. I totally get it. Now here's the thing. It can be repaired. It can be surgically repaired. And the surgery is really good, right? The surgeons are really good. We went to the orthopedic urgent care. They diagnosed it. They said, yep, I can tell it's broken. Let's do an MRI. We did the MRI. The MRI said, yep, it's messed up. Your biceps muscle's way up here and your tendon's way up here where it doesn't belong. And here's where it came off. Here's what we're going to do. We'll schedule surgery. I had that surgery about a week ago, and I do want to apologize for those who were waiting for a podcast episode a few days ago. It didn't come. We're a little bit late on this, but hey, I had surgery. That's the way it goes sometimes. Now, I'm going to show you again. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see on the video, I've got this little splint in here. Now, they did have a hard cast on here. They've got the splint. The only reason, not the splint, I guess, it's a soft brace. The purpose of this is to make it so that I can't extend my arm all the way. Now, again, if you're squeamish, you'll probably not want to see, but you can see the surgical scar right here. I will only show that a little bit because I know that that's not the best thing for people. But in short, I have this repaired now, and it's going to take about 6 months of physical therapy, possibly a year before this thing is totally healed. As of right now, the only thing the doctor said I'm allowed to lift is my hand. I can't lift anything else. They said I can use a mouse, I can use a trackpad, I can type, but I can't push, I can't pull, I can't lift. And it's going to be like that at least for 6 weeks where I'm doing this physical therapy. Now, why do I tell you this story? This is another example of my overconfidence. Overconfidence, thinking, well, yeah, I can lift this thing. And when I estimated at 300 pounds, 150 kilos, whatever, it might even be way more. I don't know. Whatever it was not something I should have been lifting by myself. That I think is probably the key to it. Overconfidence. Now, with this in mind, I have thought a lot over the last month while I've been dealing with this injury, or the last week since I had the surgery, almost 2 weeks now. I've had a lot of time to ponder this idea of confidence, of overconfidence, and other things. Now, I've been aware of a cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. If you've not heard of this, the Dunning-Kruger Effect, it was studied in 1999. That's when it was first studied by a couple of scientists, Dunning and Kruger. They determined that people, when it comes to a single skill, this is not about general intelligence. This is about a single skill, that people who are not very skilled in that single skill, in other words, they're not very good at performing that skill, tend to be overconfident about their ability with that skill. In other words, they think that they perform better when doing that skill than they actually do. With the same sort of skill, those who possess a tremendous amount of capability with that skill will tend to underestimate their confidence based on their capability. They'll be underconfident with their capability of that skill compared to the average, which is really, really fascinating. It just tells us that based on a specific skill, given some skill set that a person might have, those who are less confident tend to be overconfident. I should say those are less technically adept at that skill are tending to be overconfident, and those who are technically adept, very good at that skill, tend to be underconfident, which I find to be very fascinating. In my mind, I've seen examples of this through my whole life. I will look at maybe a YouTube video and say, yep, I can do that. I can totally do that. I saw this person do it, and because I saw this person do it, I can do that too. Now, I have seen examples of this with, I like watching YouTube. My wife, Shelly, she'll say, what the heck you watching YouTube so much? I like watching YouTube. I feel like I'm learning things. I feel like I get a chance to laugh, things like that. I've seen many times some of these channels that I really like, these creator type channels, these folks that are like, I am going to be a woodworker, or I am going to build electronics sculptures. Or there's one guy that I like the channel, or I liked for a long time. He was going to build a marble machine that played music. Right? It's just this machine where you would crank the machine. It would put marbles up at the top of the machine, and as these marbles dropped, it would do things like play a vibraphone, play a bass guitar, play drums, things like that. So the point of the marble machine was that it could play all these different pieces of music. Now, I have found in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, I find that these creator types on these channels, will specifically say things like, I don't want to go to school to get an engineering degree. I don't want to go and get a higher education degree that would teach me these things. I can learn them on my own. And what I've actually found in watching these channels over the years is a lot of times those folks will make costly mistakes and then learn from those mistakes. And in many cases, in my opinion, they would have learned what they needed to learn through education to not make those mistakes. In other words, rather than these folks saying, I'm going to take 4 years to get an engineering degree, for example, they say, I'm going to take 10 years of making content on YouTube and documenting all of my mistakes and still learn what I would have learned in 4 years of school. Now, I'm not saying it happens in all cases. I'm not saying that it's always the case. I mean, there's certainly people who are technically adept making YouTube channels. Furthermore, I also have no doubt that many of these people are making a lot of money with views on YouTube. And so the idea of creating things that are awesome is kind of a secondary aspect as opposed to the first desire, which is to create content that people are interested in watching. Right. And so if a person is not interested in producing high quality things, they're just there to make content, then there you go. You get hundreds of thousands of views, millions of views, you make a lot of money. It doesn't matter that you are putting out a product that is not very good and so forth. In short, I don't know necessarily, I wouldn't be able to say that all of these folks are overconfident, that they suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect, or if they just recognize that YouTube is a great platform for putting out content that people want to see. People making mistakes, people making things that are novel and interesting, but not necessarily technically awesome or engineering perfect or things that would be safe, things like that. I see that a lot. The concern I have for myself is, how does this affect my mental confidence? How does it affect their mental confidence? Now, as I would always say on every episode, I do want to put it out there, the disclaimer, I'm not a mental health professional. None of this should be taken as mental health advice or any type of medical advice. You should definitely seek out a professional, not listen to a podcast. But I will tell you from my own personal experience, I have thought a lot about what I might be able to do to try to counter this overconfidence. Because the question I've had, and this is a metacognitive question, is, Dave, is the content that you're putting out there on YouTube and on the podcast platforms, i.e., this very series, Navigating a Broken Vessel, is this part of that same overconfidence? I because if you look at it, everything that I've defined for you is exactly what I'm doing, right? I am not a professional. I give that disclaimer every time. I'm not a professional. I did not go to school for this. I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a therapist, anything like that. All I can do is talk from my own experience. And does that mean that the things that I say to you are wrong and that I'm making errors and mistakes myself? That's probably true. However, I think there's a difference. For me, I want to be honest with all of you as the viewer, as the listener, and let you know all I'm trying to do is speak from my own experience. I'm not trying to put on some sort of show that says, hey, look at me, I'm really good at this, I'm really technically adept, I'm really have a firm grasp of psychology and therapy and psychiatry and things like that. It's not that at all. I don't have any of those professional credentials, and so definitely everything I would say would be something that you would want to be suspect of. It's really fascinating because even as I talk to you, I think about some of the things I researched as I thought about this episode, that I was thinking, hey, I'm gonna talk and have a nice frank conversation with all of you about this. And one of the things that I found, not only the Dunning-Kruger effect, now I'd known about the Dunning-Kruger effect for a long time, but I never really thought to apply it to myself. And isn't that Isn't that so fascinating? Again, that metacognitive. If I were to look from the third person at Dave, I would look at this and be like, well, duh, Dave. You're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect itself, but you don't recognize that you are suffering from it because that's what the effect does, right? The concept of the Dunning-Kruger effect is those who are underperformant at a specific skill, they overestimate their capability. And one of the reasons why this might be, as far as the scientists have explained, is that they lack the ability to compare their capabilities to others. And so they think they're performing really, really well because they can't see the comparison of their output as it relates to people who are actually very skilled at that particular capability. So when I look at this, I have reevaluated for the last 2 weeks as I've had lots of time to think. I've reevaluated, is it true that I, as a kindergartner, don't know how to put my hand in a piece of clay? Is it true as a near 50-year-old man that I think I can lift something and fully have overconfidence in that to a point of breaking a component of my arm and having to deal with surgery and pain and physical therapy, and this for effectively a year before it will be back to its full strength? And I started to realize, holy moly, I am overconfident in some of these things. I I should not think that I am better than what I really am. Now, having said that, I've evaluated my career. I've looked at my career and I've said, okay, Dave, you're a technical trainer. You talk about things in some cases that you don't have as much knowledge about. I didn't go to 4 years of college to learn about AI, for example, right? I don't know that there are many people in today's world that have. There are probably lots of people that have done machine learning and other things related to AI. But I started to look at it and I thought, am I overconfident in my ability as a technical trainer, training people all over the world how to work with large data sets, how to analyze them, how to work with machine learning and artificial intelligence? And I thought, is this the Dunning-Kruger effect? And as I pondered this, I thought, actually, no, because there's objective surveys that are distributed to all of the people that I teach, and those objective surveys, they rate me highly as a trainer. They say, yes, he is good at what he does. He knows what he's doing. And that hit me hard. When I thought about that, I thought, oh my gosh, am I an imposter? Am I the kind of person that is overconfident in this capability? And it set my mind at ease knowing, no, you're actually getting feedback. You're actually getting people, third persons, right? People that are not you, Dave, that are evaluating your work continuously and saying you are doing a good job, which really hit me hard because I'm actually one of the higher rated trainers at this company that I work for as a contractor. I'm very highly rated, one of the top rated trainers. They really like me. The people that I teach really like me, and that has hit hard. And I'm not trying to put this out there to say, hey, look at me, I'm a really good trainer. It's more what I've learned, right? And I've thought, okay, it's all right, Dave. It's not overconfidence. It's not putting your hand in a piece of clay. It's not trying to lift a 400-pound riser or whatever it was, 300 pounds. It just got 100 pounds heavier, by the way. It's not about that overconfidence. It is objectively, people are saying, hey, you're okay at what you do. It's all right. And so then maybe I need to make sure not be underconfident. Now, having said that, I really wanted to learn about what I could do to not be overconfident. And so I did research on overconfidence. I did research on the things that could stop a person from being overconfident. And these things really hit home for me for a lot of different things. First of all, the idea of overconfidence has It's been around, of course, a long time. People are overconfident. I think probably the most salient example, something that would really hit home for all of us, is every single one of us thinks that we are a fantastic driver, right? We are a fantastic driver, and everybody else out there on the road doesn't have a clue what they're doing, right? Anytime there's some sort of problem, right, it's always us that did it right and all the other people that did it wrong. That's the way it always is, right? And I always thought it was funny. Anytime someone makes a mistake on the road, we're always the people to honk the horn and yell at them for being an idiot. But then when we make a mistake on the road, we're just like, oh, it's all right. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry, whatever. Please don't honk and yell and swear and call me names and point nasty gestures at me, things like that. I've always found it interesting how we're always so quick to accuse others for making mistakes. And when we do it, we're like, oh, no, I just made a mistake. No big deal. But that idea of overconfidence is something that we all struggle with. I know I struggle with it, maybe not in my career, but maybe when putting hands in clay, putting my hands underneath the riser and trying to lift it up. This overconfidence can be something bad. And so I thought, what is the cure for overconfidence? The the best one I can find, for me at least, something that really hit home for me, is what's called intellectual humility. Intellectual humility. And intellectual humility is something first of all, I love the idea of humility being this cure for overconfidence, this cure for the Dunning-Kruger effect. All of these things that we've talked about, right? Humility. In this case, it's intellectual humility, which this intellectual humility is defined as recognizing the limits of one's knowledge and acknowledging one's fallibility. Yeah, recognizing the limits of one's knowledge and acknowledging one's fallibility. Now, of course, this sounds like humility in general. It's just related to knowledge, and that makes perfect sense. What's interesting about it, though, is I found the Wikipedia article of it on this intellectual humility idea, and one of the topics in this article is about acquisition. How do we acquire intellectual humility? And there are a few ideas. There are exercises that we can do to increase our intellectual humility. So, first of all, approaching a challenging situation from a third person perspective rather than a first person perspective. So when it comes time for us to approach a situation that is challenging to us, rather than saying, this is what I am going to do, we say, well, if I was some person named Jim who was just watching this, what would Jim do? Right? How would he approach this? Now, in my mind, I thought this was interesting because this to me is the adage that has been around a long time. What would Jesus do? Right? What would Jesus do? I can't believe that that's exactly how this relates to one thing, right? So rather than saying what should Dave do, right? What should Dave do in this, moral situation, or when faced with some sort of sin or some sort of temptation that would be bad for Dave, rather than saying what would Dave do, we always, well, what would Jesus do, right? What would Jesus do? And I find it interesting that the first exercise for intellectual humility is approaching a challenging situation from a third person perspective rather than a first person perspective. What would Jesus do, right? What would another person do in this situation? It takes us away from it, right? It says, well, what would an objective person do as opposed to what would I do, right? That can be very helpful with this idea of increasing intellectual humility. Shifting towards a growth mindset of intelligence, knowing that we don't know everything and that we're ready to take on more information, that we're still here to learn. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? That's the other adage. That idea of saying, hey, I have a growth mindset of intelligence would be the opposite of that. You can teach an old dog new tricks. It's just a matter of being open. That would increase your intellectual humility. That would be something that would be beneficial to decrease overconfidence and to make it so that you reduce that Dunning-Kruger effect. When I say you, I'm meaning me. I'm meaning all of us. Next one, critical evaluation of the limitations of one's knowledge regarding particular topics or situations. In other words, allowing the objective test. So when I look at my career, all these surveys that come out and these objective tests say, Dave, you're all right at what you do. It's okay. That is extremely beneficial because it is a critical evaluation saying, Dave, you're all right. You are not overconfident. You can have the right level of confidence, but do keep in mind the first few things, right? You should be able to keep a growth mindset. You still have more to learn. There are still things that you can learn and do better with your life, with your career, and so forth. Identification of past cases where acknowledging flaws in one's thinking or ideas resulted in positive change. Resulted in identification of past cases where acknowledging flaws in one's thinking or ideas resulted in positive change. Basically, looking at the past and saying, how has my mindset evolved, right? At what points in my life was I not the old dog that couldn't be taught new tricks? When were these times that I could learn something new? And I'll tell you, this happens for me all the time. I look at my evaluation of my own intellectual humility and I think, it's all right, Dave. You're doing it. You could always do better, but you're doing it. It's not that you don't have any intellectual humility whatsoever. I looked at some of my past experiences and I thought, okay, yeah, I've evolved in the way I think. I'll give a perfect example. Something that's happening here in the state of Utah, where I live, is that there are some developers, some folks that want to put in a data center in northern Utah, a data center. And for months, my son has been saying, yeah, the data center is a bad idea. It's not a good idea. Now, of course, I acknowledge to you my own bias. I work in AI, I work in machine learning. I know the importance of data centers. And so I always would just kind of say, hey, Luke, you got to think about the other side, right? Data centers are good and we have to train new models and we have to do this and we have to do that. But when I researched it and saw what was actually involved in this data center in Utah, I realized I was wrong, just flat out wrong. And what was being proposed was not a good idea, even though I feel like, hey, at some point we need to work well with AI and ML, that's fine. But what they're proposing is not a good idea. I talked to Luke. I said, hey, Luke, I just want to let you know you're right. You're totally right. So there I was, being the old dog, not being taught new tricks, thinking I was right, not showing intellectual humility, totally being overconfident in my own capabilities with the topic, and refusing to allow Luke, my son, to be right. And so I look at that and I saw this as I evaluated this and I thought, that was a good situation, Dave. He did all right. And so again, there you go. Maybe I can have a little bit of intellectual humility. Maybe I can increase my capabilities with this intellectual humility. Last one, recognition of general human intellectual fallibility. In other words, knowing that cognitive biases exist. Cognitive biases. Now, cognitive biases, if we go down that rabbit hole, this is a deviation from a normative or rational judgment capability. In other words, you are biased in your thinking. Now, we all have cognitive biases, and what's important for us to have greater intellectual humility is to not only acknowledge that there are such things as these cognitive biases, but also to recognize that these cognitive biases affect each of us as well. Rather than saying, well, no, I don't suffer from that. That would be the opposite of intellectual humility, right? That's all there is to it. Now, there are many cognitive biases. There are lots. And I can tell you that many of these relate to me. And I remember every time I think about cognitive biases, I think about the episode where I talked to Rowdy Reeve, and he was talking about the imposter syndrome, or the bias of being an imposter. Right? It's a cognitive bias, right? You feel like you don't have the capabilities of others and that you're an imposter, right? That's one of the cognitive biases. I would invite you, definitely, I would invite you to think about your own biases, your own cognitive distortions, or those things that are wrong in your own way of thinking. Acknowledge that maybe you suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. Maybe you are overconfident in some specific areas. Now, I'm not at all trying to say you need to have your self-confidence dashed and you need to be thinking you are not skilled, right? I mean, that's not it at all. In my mind, it is saying, I want to increase intellectual humility. I want to become an intellectually humble person, right? We talk about humility in the gospel all the time. We talk about Jesus and his humility. We know that humility is a great trait for us to develop. I think intellectual humility goes right there with it. I'm definitely going to put links to these topics. Again, there's Wikipedia articles. You could probably do AI research as well. But I want to put links to at least the Wikipedia articles on these topics in the description so that you have access to them. I'm also going to put in a talk or two from General Conference that discusses humility and that desire for humility. They're out there, and I want to put them in there. I'm going to study them myself, and that to me is a personal experience, something that you would want to go through on your own, ponder it, and go from there. Now, having said that, I put these episodes out here because these are things that affect my life. These are things that I learn in my life. Just like I was talking about those content creators, I'm doing the exact same thing. It's so weird how I could say, yeah, you know, 4 years of school, you could have learned that, and here you are making all these mistakes. For me, this is about life lessons. This is for me about how to interact with myself in the world, how to improve my mental capability. It's not about me trying to pose as a healthcare practitioner or as a mental health expert. I'm not trying to be that at all. All I'm trying to do is tell you, these are things I'm working on. These are things that I've found. They seem to be helping me, and I want to continue to use them. I hope that by putting this out there, maybe it can help you. Maybe it can help you develop that intellectual humility that might then develop the type of humility that you would want and become a better person as a result of that. I would love to know what you think about this. If you don't mind, send me an email, dave@navigatingabrokenvessel.com. Go to the website, navigatingabrokenvessel.com, click on episodes in the upper right corner. You can see all of our previous episodes. We've had some really great people on this show who just have gone through a lot of different things, who've experienced a lot of different things, and they have great stories to share. I definitely want to hear from you on our Facebook and Instagram as well, Navigating a Broken Vessel. Put some comments down there. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this idea of intellectual humility, developing your capabilities with this and reducing these cognitive biases and becoming really honestly just a better person. I'd love to hear from you. I appreciate you joining me on this episode of Navigating a Broken Vessel.